Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Chemistry World webinar. I'm Ben Valsler, Chemistry World's digital editor. Now, before I get into the topic for today's webinar, I'd just like to let you know more about the platform we're using and how you can use it to interact with our three excellent guest speakers today. We're using GoToWebinar. I'm sure you will have used something very similar, if not GoToWebinar itself before. The really key thing is that it gives you control and allows you to ask those questions. And we really do want you to get engaged and get involved in the presentation by asking as many questions as you can. In GoToWebinar, you're probably joined via a browser, but you may have joined via the GoToWebinar app, in which case just look for a chat window or a questions box, which is usually down at the bottom on the right hand side, and you can type in any question that you have at any point for our panelists. Please do keep those questions coming in throughout the presentation. Don't wait until the end. We'll have maybe 15 minutes or so for questions, but if they all come in at the end, then we may miss some real gems in there, and you wouldn't want to miss out, and we don't want to miss out on your questions, so please keep them coming in. Now, for those of you who have joined us before for this sort of thing, you'll know that the entire presentation is being recorded, and we will send you a link to the recording afterwards. Now, for that reason, we don't share any of the slides. We just want you to be able to come back and view the presentation as and when you want to. You get the full context then of the slides, as well as everything that's being said. Keep an eye on your inbox for that. It'll be with you in a couple of days' time. And for those joining us live, there will also be a certificate in there as our little way of saying thank you, a certificate of attendance. So if you weren't able to join us live, you can watch the recording, but you need to join us live to get the best out of this, to ask those questions, and then get a certificate to prove you were with us and you were what really made part of this webinar special. So we have three different guests with us today, and we are covering the topic of belonging and connection. Now, this is the latest in a series of webinars that we have done called Building a Better Chemistry Culture. Now, that's Chemistry World working with the Inclusion and Diversity team at the Royal Society of Chemistry. This one in particular ties into the topic of Mental Health Awareness Week, which is all of this week, and the theme this year is loneliness. We're looking at the exact counterpoint to that and belonging, and in particular, having a sense of belonging in the chemical sciences. We have three speakers coming up who are going to look at the 5 enablers of belonging and what belonging may mean to a chemical scientist, the importance of connection, networks, mentors, those sorts of things, and why accessible practice is absolutely crucial to building cultures of belonging within the chemical sciences. So our three speakers are later on, we'll be hearing from Audrey Cameron, who is a Chancellor's Fellow and a Teaching Fellow in Chemistry Education at Murray House School of Education and Sport, which is part of the University of Edinburgh. She teaches on a PGDE Secondary Education in Chemistry, the PGDE Primary Education in Science, and the MSc Inclusive Education for Deaf Studies. So her research interest is about understanding science through sign language. We've worked with her before for our periodic song that we did for the International Year of the Periodic Table, as well as previous Chemistry World projects where we've looked at how Audrey and her colleagues and the network that she works with are trying to make chemistry more accessible to people who have problems with their hearing and communicate through British Sign Language, for example. We will also be hearing from Mahesh Sangani at Evotech. He's a senior API manager at Evotech. He received a bachelor's degree in chemistry at the University of Coventry and then joined Wellcome, which is now GlaxoSmithKline, of course, 28 years ago. Did a PhD in North London. He has a rich variety of experience and has found himself in and out of different networks and feeling belonging and not feeling belonging. So we're going to hear a really personal story from him today as to how his process and his journey has gone. But before either of them, we are going to hear from Sarah Bond from For Business Sake. She's a consultant, an advisor, facilitator, coach and researcher with over 20 years experience working with leaders, managers, teams worldwide. Now, before we hand over to Sarah for her presentation, we're going to do a quick poll to get to know a little bit more about you, our audience. So we will get that on screen. We'd like you to vote as quickly as you can because we don't have much time and we want to get into that content. It's just our way of finding out a little bit more about you. So we'll launch that and we'll come back to you in a minute or so once you've had time. So the poll says, to what extent do you feel that you belong in the chemical sciences? And it's just all of the time, most of the time, some of the time, or rarely. And we'd really like to get a snapshot of how you feel today. This is your last few seconds to get your votes in. And now we'll close that poll down. And we should have Rachel back on screen. Thank you, Rachel. I'm really sorry, I should have introduced Rachel. Rachel's been with us throughout this entire series, and clearly I'm taking her for granted. Rachel Dance here is doing BSL interpretation for us. There will be other interpreters here to help with Audrey's presentation as well. So if you need to make use of the BSL interpretation, make sure that you maximize the webcam screen, move them around how best you see fit. You can close down my camera, I won't be offended. It means that you can better see Rachel and better understand the content that we have today. So looking at the results from that, we don't need to share them on screen, but I can tell you that I'm delighted that only 5% of our audience today say that they rarely feel a sense of belonging in the chemical sciences. I'm disappointed it's any percentage at all, but I'm pleased that it's not higher. 34% say some of the time, 46% say most of the time, and just 15% of you say you always feel like you belong in the chemical sciences. Well, hopefully you'll pick up some tips today to change those percentages to increase your sense of belonging. And maybe if you currently are one of those lucky 15%, then you'll pick up ways that you can change the way you do things to help your colleagues, your friends, your students, everybody else feel like they're part of this great big friendly hug that is the chemical sciences. So that's quite enough from me. I will hand over to Sarah Bond now. So we'll get Sarah on screen and then we will check that we can hear her before we kick off into her presentation. As I said, Sarah's an experienced consultant. She has done over 20 years work looking at culture change, diversity and inclusion. And she's passionate about inclusion and the creation of inclusive cultures at work. She has joined us for a previous webinar in this series, so we're delighted to have you back. Sarah, thank you for joining us. Let's just check that we can hear you.
Can you hear me, Ben?
We can hear you clearly. Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to your presentation. I enjoyed the last one very much, and I'm really very much looking forward to seeing what you have for us this week. Thanks for joining us. I'll duck out now and I'll come back after your presentation.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ben. And thanks for asking me to join you for this webinar on belonging and connection. As Ben said, I'm passionate about inclusion, but I have to say I'm also passionate about belonging and connection. And part of my passion, my interest in the topic came from a piece of research that I conducted for the Royal Society of Chemistry last year into belonging and connection. And so what I'm going to do today is to share with you some of the headlines, if you like, from that study. And actually, it's really interesting to look at the results of the poll, because in the poll you said, or 46% of you said that you feel a sense of belonging in the chemical sciences most of the time. And that really resonates with one of the first findings from the study, which is that few people felt that they rarely belonged, exactly as the poll said, but few people felt like they always belonged in the chemical sciences. One of the things that really struck me and the others from the D&I team who were involved in this study as well was what we call the fragility of belonging. And on the next slide, you'll see a quote from somebody who was involved in the study who described it really well, I think. They said, the thing with this sense of belonging is that it comes and goes. It's not something that's a fixed state. I can feel like I belong one moment or one day, and then the next day or the next moment, I just don't feel like I belong at all. What we also found is that questions of belonging and not belonging, like everybody can relate to. So, that feeling of belonging is something which is familiar to all of us. They're universal feelings, but they're not constant. As I say, that feeling of belonging comes and goes based on an interplay of factors, which are around, myself, others, my relationship with others, the environment in which I'm operating. But what we also found is that some people experience or have a stronger sense of not belonging than others, or feel that they don't belong more frequently than others. And what we found is that experiences of not belonging are often closely associated with experiences of exclusion. So just to repeat, belonging and not belonging are universal experiences, but they're perhaps particularly important in the lives of those who are already underrepresented in the chemistry community. So if we move on to the next slide, we've started talking about belonging, but it's always useful to define our terms here. And when we asked chemists, what do you mean by belonging? What does belonging mean to you, rather? They said basically 4 things. The first thing they said is that belonging is about being part of a community with a shared identity. It's about being able to say, I am a chemist, so I share an identity as a chemist. Belonging is also about being able to contribute to a community. So to contribute your opinions, your ideas. It's about being able to share without worrying about, am I saying the wrong thing, or do I sound a bit stupid when I say this? It's being able to make a contribution and feel confident about making that contribution. Belonging is also about feeling accepted and respected, both personally and professionally. It's about not having to hide who you are. And then finally, several people said to us, belonging is about feeling you've got a right to be where you are, or rather knowing you've got a right to be where you are, irrespective of what others say. So the next slide, I've shared a quote on the next slide, again, from one of the participants in the study who was describing, what does belonging feel like? And it's really, I think, important in the context of Mental Health Awareness Week, if we were to think about what's the opposite of belonging, it's almost like loneliness, because belonging feels like not being lonely. It feels like you've got self-worth, self-esteem, as it said on this slide, self-confidence, that you're part of a group that provides support. Belonging is what lots of us aspire to, and it's a sort of very basic human need. I was looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and this hierarchy of needs says after basic needs like food and water and safety, the need for love and the need for belonging are the most important and fundamental psychological needs of human beings. So belonging feels like these things, but it also feels like, a really important need has been met when you feel like you belong. And I think we'll talk a bit in a minute about what the effect of not belonging is, but I think some of the pain of not belonging comes from belonging being such a fundamental human need. So if we move on to the next slide, I think it's really worth asking ourselves, like, why does belonging matter? I mean, I think for the longest time, conversations about belonging and connection or connectedness have been felt to me maybe a little bit sort of fluffy, maybe a bit inappropriate for the workplace, but I would absolutely disagree. And again, the chemists that we spoke to in this study were very clear about why belonging matters. And they said, first of all, belonging, as I said a minute ago, makes you feel better. It boosts mental health, it boosts well-being, it enables you to focus. When you feel like you belong, you can focus on whatever it is that you're supposed to be focusing on, rather than feeling distracted, worrying about your sense of entitlement to be where you are. We heard that feeling you don't belong is painful. It can be distracting, it can be lonely. It takes its toll. Not belonging takes its toll. And again, as I say, I'm not a neuroscientist, but what I understand is that the pain of not belonging creates a response in terms of the way our brains function, which isn't that different from physical pain. So at its most fundamental, belonging matters because it just makes us feel better. The second thing is, as I've already referred to earlier on, belonging matters because when you belong, you feel more able to share your ideas. You feel less likely to be judged by others. You feel like you're more able to collaborate with them. And because of all of that, because people who belong are able to be innovative and creative, perhaps feel more courageous, they feel like they're really making a difference, and that in itself leads to better science outcomes. So there was an argument there to say, belonging, that sense of belonging is really fundamental to performance as well. And lots of data from lots of different contexts shows that too, that people who belong in whatever context, whether that's school or university or work or in your community, are more likely to perform better, more likely to progress, less likely to leave, and as somebody said to us, less likely to fall out of love with chemistry. Okay, so let's have a look at the next slide. What gets in the way of belonging? Well, again, four key messages that emerged from the study from those chemists who said they sometimes felt like they didn't belong. One of those was being told they didn't belong, and that was really, that was really sad to hear. I think there were a number of chemists, very successful chemists actually, who'd been told early on in their careers that chemistry wasn't for them, that they wouldn't get funding for a PhD, that they'd never be a lecturer, that they didn't have the right science background, they didn't have the right class background, socioeconomic background. They didn't look and behave like a sort of proper chemist, if you like, whatever that means. So being told you don't belong is a major barrier to belonging. The second thing that sometimes gets in the way of belonging is when you're feel like you're the only. And what do I mean by that? Like the only woman in a senior position, the only minority ethnic chemist, the only out gay chemist, the only chemist with a disability. That sense of being the only can really act as a barrier to belonging. Feeling excluded or othered, feeling excluded, having assumptions made about you, being repeatedly left out of meetings or office lunches or socials or whatever. That sense of exclusion, I mean, there's no surprises there, right? That also makes people feel like they don't belong. And then the final barrier to belonging is sometimes the culture of chemistry itself. Sometimes the lack of diversity at senior levels in chemical sciences, sometimes the undervaluing of people's soft skills or approaches, sometimes some of the kind of elitism about different kinds of chemistry, for instance. All of those can also lead people to feel like they don't belong. But I also want to share with you on the next slide some more, a more sort of constructive approach, which is to say, well, okay, so if that's the situation, what is it that really helps people feel they belong? Because there are a lot of people who we spoke to who did feel that they absolutely belonged in the chemical sciences, some or all of the time. So what was going on for them? And what we found is that people who feel that they belong feel really a strong sense of connection with others. And I'm going to come back to connection in a minute, because that was one of the real focus areas for today's webinar. People who belong also feel respected. They feel accepted and respected for whoever they are, whatever their professional background, whatever their ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, etc. They feel also, people who feel they belong feel like their accounts of their own lived experience are accepted, not questioned. And that's a really important part of respect. Diversity is a really important enabler of belonging too. So not having assumptions made about you or not being the only, as I've just described. Inclusion, when you see the organization that you're working for taking action to create an inclusive culture, reaching out to you, including you in discussions, in meetings, in gatherings, all those actions also help create a sense of belonging. And then finally, having an intention to belong. Some people told us, it's about having a determination to belong, about developing and displaying self-confidence, remembering, holding on to the belief, to the memory that you have an absolute right to be here. I just want to spend the last minute or two going back to this question about connection, because for me, this is the one that really matters and the one that I think was a real insight from the study itself. So what do we mean by connection? On the next slide, some definitions of connection from chemists themselves. It's about making authentic human connections with other people. It's about, when you feel connected with somebody, you're in a relationship with them that feels supportive and kind and encouraging, but it's not just about connection with individuals. It's about connection with the whole sense of community. It's about feeling connected with people as role models and mentors, and I know we're going to be talking about this later on in the webinar too. And it's about having a shared sense of identity with other people. But what do we do about building connection? One of the things that the RSC is working on at the moment is generating tools to help build connection. And on the final slide, I just pulled out 3 areas of activity which certainly support the building of connection. The first is connection through conversation. So reaching out to others, making time for conversation, making sure the language you use in conversation is inclusive and respectful, and being a good listener. The second action is around meeting behaviours, welcoming people by name into meetings, using icebreakers that really help people connect, ensuring everybody gets a chance to contribute. And then finally, building connection through allyship and challenge. Being an ally, not letting inappropriate or disrespectful behaviour go unchallenged, and amplifying, not speaking over or for or on behalf of other people. All of those are what helps build connection. So thanks, Ben. Thank you for that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for joining us again. Sarah will be sticking around to answer any questions you have. So if there's anything you'd like to expand on from Sarah's presentation, please get those questions into GoToWebinar as soon as they occur to you, and she'll join us again after the next 2 presentations as we tackle your questions. Moving on to our next presentation, our next speaker is Audrey Cameron. Now, in addition to the educational responsibilities I told you earlier, Audrey also manages the STEM in BSL Glossary at the Scottish Sensory Centre, which is also at the University of Edinburgh, and prior to that did polymer research in Durham and Strathclyde universities. So let's get Audrey and also her interpreters to join us on camera and check that we are getting and seeing everything that we should. Audrey, thank you for joining us. Hi. And Tessa.
Hello. Hi.
And
nice to be. Thank you.
I think we are comfortable enough to move on for now. So thank you for joining us. Unless David wanted to join us at this point as well, or is David happy to stay in the background? I'm going to take the lack of responses, meaning David will join us for the Q&A later on. So thank you for joining us as well.
Tessa will be voicing the presentation and David will join us later.
Splendid. Thank you, Audrey. We're very much looking forward to your presentation. Very keen on the STEM and BSL glossary, something that we covered in my very early days at Chemistry World. I'm delighted to see it continues to be expanded and developed and provides an essential service to scientists who otherwise would find it a lot harder to communicate. So thank you for being such a key part of that. And I'll leave it to you to give your presentation.
Thank you. And thank you for your support as well. Thank you, everyone. Right. Could I have the next slide, please? First of all, hello, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here today. So Tessa will be speaking for me. I will be signing my presentation. As you can see on the slide, I'm a Chancellor's Fellow at Edinburgh University, but that is the result of a very long journey. You can see that there is a picture on the slide of a sign that was on Chemistry World magazine. Next slide, please. I just want to give you a brief tour of where I've come from and the journey I've taken. I was born deaf. Both my parents are hearing and had no experience of deafness. They'd never met a deaf person before. They didn't sign. So I grew up learning how to fit into a hearing world. I went to a deaf school, and that's where I developed an interest in chemistry and science. And I knew that my future was going to be involving that somehow. I'm sure that's the same for many people, that enthusiasm is sparked at a young age. So I went to university in 1986, which is a horrifyingly long time ago. And I don't know where that time has gone, I have to be honest. And you'll see on that photograph, I'm on the left. This is my graduation photograph. So my chemistry degree was at the University of the West of Scotland, and that's where I started my membership of the Institute and the Royal Society of Chemistry. 35 years I've been a member. So my tutor at university encouraged me to carry on to do a PhD, and I thought that would be impossible as a deaf student. I didn't know anybody else in Scotland who was deaf who had done a PhD, and I laughed it off. And I went off to work for a year, and I worked as a chemical engineer, and I realized that my tutor was right. I did want to go back and study some more. I had such a passion for research, and I went to Strathclyde University to do my PhD. And then I stayed on to do a postdoc for 3 years. And that was with ICI, with paint. Then I moved to Durham University for 3 years. And that was with Glaxo Wellcome, funded by them. And all that time, I encountered a variety of barriers. And going to Durham University, I had some trepidation because when I look back, there were no interpreters available throughout my studies. My degree was inaccessible. I relied on the group that you see in the photograph here. These were the friends who helped me. They took turns to sit next to me and take copious notes that I could copy throughout the lectures. So for 4 years, they provided my support. I couldn't understand the lecturers at all. So they were the group that I worked with. I relied on them writing everything down for me. So this group were the ones who got me through the course. If it wasn't for them, I would not have been able to continue with my course and with my studies, and I would not have engaged with chemistry. Doing the PhD, I again had to rely on notes. So my supervisor and I would write notes to each other. I wasn't able to have a proper conversation with my supervisor or a debate with the other chemists who were also PhD students. And I really wanted to be part of that. Notes were not enough. I had so much more I wanted to contribute that I couldn't. With my postdoc, I went to ICI and Glaxo Wellcome, and my supervisor would speak for me. And I would wait until after the meeting to find out what had happened, and then he would write everything down for me. So I was always finding things out afterwards. There were no interpreters because I had tried bringing in some interpreters, but they had no chemistry background, no knowledge, certainly not at that level. I was looking at postdoc polymer chemistry. It was not something that generic interpreters could handle. It's not their fault, but the fact is there are no qualified interpreters who are qualified in chemistry at that level. So then when I finished at Durham, I thought, I want to do something for the next generation. I want to improve this. I want to improve access for deaf young people. And I've always felt very invested in and very involved in colleagues who were trying to welcome me and make me feel that I was part of that, and they accepted me fully, but I never felt I could properly be involved. So I decided to become a teacher. And this was life-changing for me. I was finally able to speak for myself, use sign language, and interact directly. Next slide, please. I've put this on here because my membership and qualification and becoming an RSC chartered chemist meant a lot to me. I think there should be some text on that slide. If you click again, thank you. So I just wanted to explain that this gave me credibility. It showed that I could do this work. Often the assumption was that as a deaf person, I couldn't, that I didn't have anything to contribute. There was an assumption that being profoundly deaf, I couldn't contribute. But I don't speak that well, and my language is sign language. But this qualification and getting chartered and having that membership really raised that profile and that credibility and helped my career enormously. So I'm very grateful for that. Yeah, clicking again, thank you. But as I say, communication was a barrier. It was very isolating, very frustrating to have those barriers. Becoming a teacher, I was then able to get involved in the STEM glossary. So we're going to talk about that briefly. Next slide, please. So you can see here, Ben mentioned the glossary earlier with the Scottish Sensory Centre. We have over 3,000 terms that are translated into sign language about astronomy, biology, chemistry, computing science, geography, mathematics, and physics. And the core group of people who worked on that, the team of people were deaf scientists, mathematicians, computer scientists, and so on, and sign linguistics, sign linguists. Next slide, please. And so we've been running for over 15 years, and we've had some wonderful support from a variety of sponsors, and which has grown over the years. And the Royal Society of Chemistry has been particularly instrumental in that. So the Scottish Government initially gave us seed funding for it, but we realised very quickly that the impact of the glossary, we had about 200 signs just then, but we realized we needed to expand. So then we went to IOP and the Institute of Physics. I know, sorry, chemists, but yeah, we went to the Institute of Physics first. And we were invited to speak at a diversity meeting. And they asked, I asked the chief executive, you know, is there any possibility of funding to continue with this, and put a proposal in. And then the science community really backed us. The more I asked, the more people came forward, the more we felt supported, and we were funded to continue the work. And I realized the importance of sign language. Giving that access for deaf children was vital, but also giving that support to interpreters to develop their vocabulary. So any deaf person going to university could have interpreters who knew the vocabulary, or if they wanted to work in that field, there would be a resource for interpreters to be able to provide that access. I just want to briefly show you the website. Next slide, please. So that's what it looks like. It's a free resource. You can click on the different subject areas and you can see the signs. Next slide, please. This is me signing chemical reactions. This is how we sign it. Because this shows a change from start to finish, that you make something into something new. And it shows that how fast or how slowly you sign it indicates the rate of that reaction. But just signing the word is not enough. You need to be able to add a definition. So if you click on the next slide, please. So in that website, there are definitions as well as the signs. I know I look quite young here, but each sign has a definition signed as well with an English text. So it does cover the bilingual needs. And that means anyone can use this resource. And we also show lab experiments, if you show that on the next slide. We have some filmed lab experiments as well, so that young people can connect the sign with the definition and with what it actually looks like. Just recently, we realized the importance of the signing is actually not just for deaf young people. It really helps scientists generically, for young people generically, to understand the concepts, particularly when they're quite abstract. Sign language really helps. So we're researching now into whether the signing of these concepts will really help young people to develop their understanding. So that's another talk for another time. Next slide, please. So the team, I'm going to show you who they are in just a minute. They've worked incredibly hard. They've given up many hours to dedicate to this project. When we started, there were only 6 of us. So over the years, it's grown to a team of 33. Next slide, please. So then we can have a look at some of the people in that team. So we have scientists, teachers. They all have qualifications, degrees and above, higher education qualifications in these subjects. We've started working with high school pupils as well. So in the last year, we started working with them as well. Because it's really important to give opportunities to young people coming through, because they are the future. Next slide, please. There's some more pictures. And there's some more. Next one, please. And the next one. And the next one. Thank you. So this is what a typical workshop would look like, where we are discussing the terms. And we have to make sure that the term is completely understood. We have to really unpack what that term means. We can't hide behind it or fudge it in any way. It has to have absolute clarity. sign language is visual, we can't allow for mistakes in understanding. We can't hide anything. It really has to be so clear. So we have to understand it fully. So there can be some debate when people say, no, this is not what this term means, and unpacking it until we eventually come to a consensus and find the right sign for that term. I'm going to show you, if you go to some of the people involved in that. So this report here about belonging, there's a quote there I wanted to share with you. So the group of deaf scientists were saying that within this group, with other deaf scientists, I feel I belong. We have a shared language. We can talk about our passion for science. It's like I mentioned before, doing my PhD was very lonely. Writing notes, finding out information after the meetings and things like that did not make me belong. So this sense of belonging with the STEM work, the Glossary project, really is something I've been waiting for my entire career. I think for 20 years, I would say I'd been waiting for that sense of belonging that was facilitated by this group. And I have to say it's such a positive feeling. When I asked other deaf scientists, they felt the same, that sense of having waited their entire career for that sense of belonging. Next slide, please. I'm hoping that we have time to watch a short video. And if we don't have time, then move on to the next slide. But if we do, then press play. Because of COVID, we moved the workshops online. So this, what you're seeing here is a workshop that's online. And we're talking about the sign for alkaline. There's a lot of debate going on. We haven't come to an agreement yet. So what you're seeing are people discussing this. And we haven't actually solved this yet. But there are different levels of understanding here for alkaline. And it's working out which is the most appropriate to use for the term. If you go to the next slide, please. The RSC inclusion and diversity funding has been really supportive. Working with Heathlands School for the Deaf in St Albans. The RSC has funded work with them, so we've been able to expand our resource of videos, of demonstrations, doing kitchen chemistry and BSL. The photos there that you can see are young people signing these concepts and us filming them. That's what the two photos are. And so we're there to support and help them know what to say, but basically the young people are leading it and learning presentation skills and so on. And it had such a positive impact on them. It really helped them to understand these concepts better because they were working through it in sign language. And this links to our next project, which is about looking at GCSE chemical practicals in BSL. In videos, so they can do those for their exams. So that's been recently set up. We now have a network of deaf chemistry teachers who are looking at how to empower young people and hopefully grow this group of people and grow the number of deaf chemists that we have in the country. So at the moment we have 6 deaf chemists, but we're really hopeful that we'll get more. And very much valuing the RSC's work to very much appreciate the way that they've appreciated diversity and that they're wanting to include more people. So next slide, please. So at the moment, I'm in another group, a network, with other ITE tutors around Scotland, again set up by the Royal Society of Chemistry. Stephen Hendry and Laura Alexander, who are named on the slide, set that up to encourage chemistry tutors to talk to each other, work together, feel part of a network, part of a community, and to belong. So now I feel that I'm part of more than just one group. I'm part of many groups. I'm part of the chemistry world, and I have a language to use to share within those groups. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Tessa, for all your hard work there as well. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us again. We are running a little bit late, so I will very quickly get us into our third speaker for today. Audrey will join us for Q&A after this presentation. again, keep those questions coming in. Our third speaker for today, Mahesh Sangani from Evotech, leads a team of 16 chemists, projects and learning development at API chemists. So he clearly knows something about keeping a team together and hopefully helping them all to feel like they belong. But today he's going to be talking about his own personal experience and career path. So Mahesh, let's invite you to join us on camera and check your microphone. And then I look forward to your presentation. And while Mahesh is getting set up, although clearly we can't see him just yet, I will once again put a little reminder, if you missed any part of this, if you'd like to see it again, we will send you a link to the recorded version of this presentation. It will be in your inbox in a couple of days' time. Mahesh, there you are.
Excellent. Can you hear me, Ben?
We can hear you clearly as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and take it away with your presentation, and then we'll go straight from there into Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. And thank you, RSC, for inviting me to talk through my personal journey. I think what I would like you to do is really take away kind of 3 key messages from this short presentation about belonging, really. What do I mean by belonging? What are the key ingredients of belonging? What does a belonging person actually have in terms of their makeup? And I call it the 3 C's. They certainly have courage, which Sarah talked about, confidence, which Audrey talked about, and contribution. Those people have those kind of skills, are always contributing. So I would say those are the 3 areas. The second one is my own personal journey. Now, I certainly have some elements that I will talk through about confidence and contribution, but my personal journey about belonging is actually relating to acceptance, accepting the situation which you're in, and then making the change. So to me, that is my personal journey that I'll talk through. And the third thing about my personal journey about belonging is actually it can take time. And so therefore it needs patience. So that's the 3 key messages I would like you to take away. Now, currently I'm at Evotech, but my journey actually started in 1992, so over 30 years ago. And I started in a company called Glaxo Wellcome as a graduate, and I came in very enthusiastic, very keen, and very keen to do laboratory work and solving chemistry problems. And I was working on multiple projects at Glaxo Wellcome, and I was actually being acknowledged for my work because the kind of work I was doing, route scouting, people who are in chemistry would understand that, optimization, method identification, and I was certainly getting acknowledgement for the work I was doing. I was getting praise. I was even, as Audrey mentioned, I was nominated for an RSC Chartered Chemist in 1992. So I was nominated for that. So I was quite happy. And also, I was also doing a part-time PhD when I joined the company, which the company allowed me to do some work every Friday. So I was really feeling confident. I was contributing, and I felt belonging, really did felt belonging. And the company was in Dartford, and I was in North London. So 3 years of two-hour journey back and forth from North London to Dartford actually didn't feel like at all painful. I was truly felt welcomed in that organization. Then the merger happened between Glaxo and Wellcome. Again, I was very enthusiastic, very proud actually to be working for a company like Glaxo Wellcome. But there was a cultural shift, and I could see that cultural shift from the company that I joined as Wellcome, and the merged company was very much a hierarchical company, and I felt kind of out of field, out as an outsider, really. Didn't feel part of the team. simply because the culture was really where the scientists were all had PhDs, for example, and they're all from Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, and I actually felt not part of that team. And I actually wasn't confident and didn't feel like contributing and really felt not belonging. Now, at that time, I did feel like leaving the company. Obviously, you do feel like that because you come from a company where you feel welcome and then you feel not welcomed in this merged company. Now, it wasn't the people, it was just the culture. It was just the culture that was there at the time. But one thing I did notice was there was some feedback, and it is the feedback that I acted on. And one of the feedback was that my organic chemistry knowledge wasn't as strong. I wasn't, if chemists would understand, knew curly arrows very well. And that was one of the feedback. So what I did was to actually get a mentor, get a teacher within the company who would actually help me through learning organic chemistry, because I had an organometallic chemistry, but not organic chemistry. So by over the 2 or 3 years, I actually started learning organic chemistry through a mentor within Glaxo Wellcome. I also went outside the company and actually personally hired somebody as an external lecturer to help me with my organic chemistry. And certainly I could feel my organic chemistry was improving. But in parallel, and sometimes some people don't miss this, there was an email from all staff from the organization looking for volunteers to stand at a Glaxo Wellcome for A-level students. Now you think, well, what's that got to do with belonging? Well, has a lot to do with the belonging. So I went to that. It was a weekend, and I was actually at a stand talking through to people about chemistry degrees and what it's like being in chemistry. And that was quite, really felt confident and comfortable with that. Then from that, actually, I connected with somebody in Discovery, and they gave me an opportunity to actually be a link university person, which we call do milk rounds around universities. That same person invited me to be within the company itself, interviewing graduates, because my organic chemistry was improving. My my PhD that I was doing was also helping with my organic chemistry. So I was interviewing graduates and PhDs, and I actually felt within that small team, although it was only 2 or 3% of the contribution to the bigger job that I was doing, I felt like a very strong contributor to this small team. And that gave me confidence, and I actually felt belonging. And through that, I found myself that my chemistry was improving, and I was allowed to actually do a PhD, part-time PhD in this new Glaxo Wellcome organization. So again, a confidence and contribution was there. But the important thing here is that it's accepting the situation. I could have left, but I didn't. I actually stayed on and continued with it and learned from the feedback that I received. So that happened in 1995. Then in 2001, I received my PhD, and I really felt part of this new organization, which merged with GSK, and I felt really comfortable. But then there was another type of belonging, the belonging to myself. I actually felt that I wasn't belonging to myself. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to be more I wanted to contribute more to the company. And I felt like API leadership was something that I wanted to do, but it was kind of out of reach, to be honest with you. I had the motivation, but I didn't have the skill set again. So what I did was to actually, again, found a mentor, somebody within the company who can actually explain to me what an API leadership means, what the roles is, and what do you need to do to become an API leader. and I needed to do some paper exercise. So I worked through this with the mentor to understand the drug development process from discovery all the way through to commercial, what is actually required for delivering drug substances. And from there, I actually went on and got some hands-on experience. My mentor was saying that I needed to get some hands-on experience in terms of understanding what solid state chemistry was, what was particle forming step was, what isotope chemistry was, what actually happened in pilot plant. So while I was doing my work and I was happy belonging to GSK, but I was very narrow-minded. I needed to expand, and the mentor was helping me with that and making me feel that I needed to learn more skills. And so I took some secondments within the organization in a number of fields like pilot plant, like discovery, like isotope chemistry, like formulation development. And that opened up even more connection within the organization. I managed to get some feedback from the people that I was doing secondments with, and that feedback went into my home department. But it was clear to me that with all the secondments, and sometimes people do move on, but API chemistry and chemical development is what I really wanted. So I always came back from those secondments back to my home department. So after that, I became an API leader, and I was able to influence and motivate people within my team. But there was still something missing. I still felt like there was something missing from what I wanted. And one thing I felt like that I wanted to be able to develop people. And this actually came through coaching sessions. So I had a coach within GSK, which was outside my own home department. And that coach was able to help me through those 7 sessions to understand what actually made me tick. What was the bit that made me come into the work environment? And through that coaching, I was able to understand it wasn't just the projects that I was interested, but I was also interested in people development. And it is through that I was told that perhaps I wasn't able to have that opportunity within the GSK environment. Because the competition was there. There were the people were the team were narrowing. So I needed to go outside the GSK environment, and it is when through that I actually applied at Evotec. So this is the first time I did a CV. That was in 1992, and I had to redo my CV after 28 years, and I got the position. And again, now I'm in a new organization, which has been 2 years. And you still have to, again, start at the beginning. Something Sarah was talking about earlier. You're always developing yourself, and you're always trying to belong somewhere. And this is an ongoing process. So do not be afraid.
Mahesh, just a quick 1-minute warning. I hate to interrupt your flow, but we do need to get time for Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is my last slide, and the key thing I would like to explain to you is really 3 things here. Get a mentor. Make sure you have a mentor which will help you with developing your skills. Obtain a coach. This could be internal or could be a family member. Consider secondments, which is something that is quite important to identify what you need, and that will help you with the belonging. But the key message here is the person who feels like they're belonging has the courage, the confidence, and the contribution. But my personal story is about accepting the situation that you're in. I'm not saying put up with it, but accept the situation, right, and take a positive action. That's me done, Ben.
Thank you so much, Mahesh. I'm sorry to rush you at the end there. We've had 3 fantastic presentations. I think all of them could have been a full webinar in and of themselves. So thank you for joining us, and stay there for now. We will get everybody back on camera as well. Those of you looking at the webcams, you're about to see that box expand quite dramatically as everybody joins us once again. We have a few minutes for Q&A, and we've had some lovely feedback, some very considered questions from the audience. There is still time if you'd like to get those questions in. So let's just dive in in with something that I think all three of you would be able to have a crack at. This one is from Amit, and it really, I think we can all take a different angle on this. How can we make the atmosphere around us more inclusive? So in his example, he says he does not speak the local language, or didn't perhaps to begin with. So what initiatives can we take to make the atmosphere generally more inclusive? Sarah, you were our first presenter. Let's come back to you for your first thought on that. What can we do to make that atmosphere that bit more inclusive?
Yeah, I mean, two thoughts sort of immediately come to mind. You know, there's things that can be done at the level of organisation. You know, so a more inclusive organisation might be one, for instance, that, as Mahesh was talking about, sets up mentors or coaches for people who are maybe underrepresented in the organisation, or has approaches recruitment in an inclusive way. So I think there's lots and lots and lots of stuff that organisations can do. But I think if we're talking interpersonally, for me, it's very much about listening, about respect, about really kind of paying attention to what the other person is saying rather than making assumptions about that person. I think for me that's probably one of the fundamentals about creating a more inclusive environment.
Thank you, Sarah. So we need a structural approach as well as a personal and individual approach. Audrey, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. And I think about my own experience as a PhD student and as a postdoc. I mean, I was mixing with people from different countries, and it was kind of interesting because we were in a similar boat in terms of our access to language. And I would be very much I think what we need to do is we need to ask people what kind of is appropriate for them, what it is that they need, maybe conversations with line managers to get a sense of how we work together, how we integrate and bring with the skills, and for people to kind of talk about that and let us know what it is that they need. You know, when we think about diversity, what comes with diversity is creativity.
Thank you, Audrey. Mahesh, clearly you've devoted quite a bit of your time to creating spaces, to getting out to universities, reaching out. How would you recommend that we foster a more inclusive, a more belonging atmosphere?
I think for me, being authentic. I think being authentic is something that Sarah talked about, and being honest and being listening very well, but also actually, I would say finding a topic that you can all have a common ground on so that you can actually be involved in that topic for discussion. I think that also helps with inclusiveness, is to find that common topic.
Thank you very much. Just so you know, while we're doing the Q&A, we're also sharing some links in the chat there. These are for other resources and other events that you can join with us. Just click on them now to open them in your browser, or copy and paste them off for later. And there should be some really good resources there for you popping up in the chat throughout the Q&A. Let's take another question from the audience here. What's this? Okay, Raquel has a very interesting question about how, I guess, how ambitious we can be with this. Is it realistic to think that soon that poll we did at the beginning would have 0% of people rarely feel that they belong in the chemical sciences? Mahesh, we just come back to you. Let's come back to you on that one. Is it realistic to think that everybody will always find somewhere they belong within an industry like the chemical sciences?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's important that you enjoy the topic. I think that's the key thing. Whatever you're doing, you need to be enjoying it. And if you're not enjoying it, that's where you need to find out through a coach, what is it that makes you tick? I think that's the key part. If you don't have that, and it may be that you need somebody's help to help you with that.
Thank you. Audrey, clearly you had to plough your own furrow in order to find your sense of belonging. It took you, as you said earlier, 2 decades to really feel like you'd reached that. Do you think it's reasonable for us to obviously we hope that everybody feels that they will belong. Do you think it's reasonable to expect it?
Well, I mean, it's my dream that we get to that figure, that nobody faces exclusion. I think, you know, it comes down to respecting one another. I think it's not just about I'm doing okay. We need to be looking outside ourselves, thinking about how other people are doing, you know, being more careful with one another. Am I doing something that is genuinely inclusive? Is what I'm doing helping the people around me? Maybe making, for example, I suppose I'm thinking, you know, things that might benefit me are typically things that will benefit other people as well. So, for example, I suppose thinking about meetings, having interpreters in meetings, the speed at which people talk about things is then moderated by having interpreters, because they just cannot interpret people talking over one another or talking too quickly. So having interpreters there actually it has an impact and makes things more accessible for everybody. And it can be small little things that we can do that will encourage or facilitate inclusion for everybody. I mean, I think everybody has something to contribute. I think that's the key message here. And about those, being respectful and valuing people. Sorry, Ben, just a bit behind.
That's right. I guess those sorts of structural changes, for example, running your meetings with a fixed agenda that people have seen in advance, would make it easier for people with all sorts of different accessibility issues, be it that they require an interpreter. The interpreter is pre-briefed, and so if there is new language, they can make sure they're up to speed. But also it helps the people who are perhaps just a bit more shy about coming forward. They already have a better idea in their head and so on. So it doesn't have to be people who have what we would recognize as accessibility problems that benefit from the sorts of changes that we would put in place.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Ben.
Excellent. We are, in fact, we've technically overrun, which I feel really bad about because I know that Sarah needs to get off. So Sarah, let's let you have the final word on this. Do you have any further thoughts on that? Is it reasonable to expect that everybody belongs?
I'm not. I mean, I think it certainly needs to be more of an intention. That's what I would say. I think that you know, employers, organisations, companies, etc., need to pay more attention to belonging. And one of the things that the study found is that there's very little measuring of belonging going on. So I think, you know, more needs to be done. You know, like conversations need to be had. Maybe include belonging in employer surveys to actually identify where people are at and what people's experience of belonging is and barriers to belonging, etc. Because I think without measuring belonging, and without having that, you know, deliberate intention to increase belonging, I think it's going to be a long road to get that down to zero.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us. One thing we've clearly identified here is if you want to feel like you belong, then a lot of the onus is on you to take those steps. And everybody who's joined us today, I think, has taken at least that first step, and they will be inspired by your stories, your advice, your experience to date. So we really appreciate having you all join us for today's webinar. Thank you so much. I'm going to share a few extra links as we close out today's webinar. Let's get the next slide out. Here we go. The Chemists Community Fund is a link that we've just shared in the chat. But if you do find yourself in the need of a conversation, just a friendly ear to listen, then we have the Wellbeing and Listening line that's open Monday to Friday, 8 AM to 8 PM here in the UK. That's a free phone UK landline, and the number is on screen for you now. Again, if you missed that, don't worry, we'll send you the recording. You can pick it up from the video at the end of that. And there's counselling, specialist support and so on available for RSC members and partners. That is part of the wider Chemist Community Fund, who I don't have time to go into all the fantastic things they do right now, but Google them or look at the article that Chemistry World did about all of the many things they've achieved recently. There are fantastic support there for everybody in the chemical sciences, so please have a look at what the Chemist Community Fund do. And our final slide has got some links for upcoming events. These are all in the chat for you now as well. These are more careers focused, but they're also in partnership with our I&D team, so grab those links while you can from the chat, or again watch the video, and if there's anything else that we can do, then there'll be a survey say on your way out of this webinar, please let us know not only about these specific issues, but also general things that you'd like us to cover in the Building a Better Chemistry Culture series. Now, there are so many people for me to thank, and I am out of time, so I'm going to be incredibly quick, but the I&D team at the Royal Society of Chemistry encouraged this webinar series in the first place, worked with us really closely to make this happen, have found fantastic guests like those that you've seen today, and helped me to know what to talk to them about, help deal with your questions and highlight the right questions to ask, and are always a real pleasure to work with. Rachel Dance, of course, has been with us since the beginning doing BSL interpretation as well, so we're delighted to have Rachel with us throughout. So that's a final thank you from me. I'm Ben Valsler, Chemistry World's digital editor. My team have made this happen, so thanks to them as well. It's a goodbye from Audrey as well. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you for the next Chemistry World webinar.